I know, right? Supposed to be working on somebody else. We're doing Dante. I have a jacket to do, and the costume is completed. So that's what we're going to do. It's probably going to be a couple of videos. I ordered this thing off the internet. It's not bad, but it's plastic. And it looks it. I mean, it's plastic. Last time I was at Tandy, I picked up an entire hide of thin, black, chrome tanned leather. That's what we're going to use. Step one, we're going to prep the surface. We're going to pull this out because let me show you. It's kind of neat. That is a full 4 foot by 7.5 workstation. It's pretty neat. I haven't talked about this yet. This is my new workstation. It's got a ton of storage, huge volume. It's 4x4. It's about 4 foot tall, so I can work on it without being all hunched over. It doesn't squeak. Oh my God. And it's on casters. So if I need to move it out to film or back or left or right, it's super easy to do. And it's large enough. I can put down my cutting mat and still have room all the way around. This thing is amazing. But I digress. Back to the project at hand. This is Dante's jacket from the reboot of DMC. The one that didn't do very well, which is sad. I kind of liked it, but you know. And this thing is 100% vinyl, which is good because it means I can recycle it and not feel bad about it. It is fast fashion, but you know, it is what it is. So we are going to cut this thing apart, see how much black we have and what we need, because I think I may need more red than I think I need. But we'll find out in a minute. Step one, let's start with the hood. We're going to start with the hood. I don't use seam rippers. I fight with them too much. I prefer a razor blade. So this lining has been top stitched the whole way. Means I need to find somewhere where it's not. Usually it's a corner. This thing has been completely top stitched, but if I start at a corner, I can just run my blade along the edge here. Be very careful. It's real easy to slip and cut yourself. Once I get it started, everything else is pretty easy. Now that I have a spot that's opened, the rest of this is super easy. All I'm doing is running my blade. Keep the fabric nice and taut, and the blade will find the way in between the two, because the thread is thinner than the fabric. As long as I give myself a little bit of room to pry. So I'm going to just keep pulling the seam apart. When we get to the hood and things start getting interesting, I may bring it back in. But for the most part, I'm just pulling stitches. This thing is so weirdly put together, because it's supposed to be a leather hood, I'm assuming. And it goes into lapels, right? So the back all folds back and you have the red leather lapel. But the way it's put together is just weird. But I had this side done. Only took me 15 minutes, so it's not terrible, but it's definitely not something I'm going to make you go through. So I'm going to pull the rest of the lining off and pick up after there, because it looks like the lining was put on after everything was done. The sleeves are a little harder to do than everything else because I don't really have a good point to start from. But if I Ginger careful, cut this right along this seam here. This is the last bit of the lining, by the way. Everything else has already been taken off. This is hard to do while dancing around a camera. There we go. So now I can just work my blade along the seam line. As long as I hold it open and just cut the stitching, the rest should just come right out. There. I don't know if any of this is going to be usable. Sewing videos are literally the worst. They're hard to film, they don't get much traction, but I needed to finish the costume. Heaven forbid I do a project that doesn't get filmed. I film about half of the things I do, by the way. There's a whole nother things going on all around that never makes it to camera. Shoulders are usually connected, either shoulders or armpits. I guess in this case it's shoulders. The lining is the hardest part because it's got weird top stitching on it that it shouldn't have. Well, it's got weird top stitching on it. So the jacket's going to be interesting as well, because there's lots of extra stuff here that, like, I don't know if you can see any of this. Look at this. So there's these stitches that go the full length, right? And they're supposed to be separate panels. But separate panels means more cost. So to keep costs down, they just stitched a bunch of pieces. So they just ran a bunch of stitches all the way along, right? Because it looks like there's a center seam and then a princess seam that stops at the sleeve. So fighting with this thing is going to be real difficult because fabric intrinsically wants to be flat. That's how it's made. And we make it round by adding seams and shapes and stuff like that. Entertainingly, hides intrinsically want to be round, and we stretch and pull to make them flat. So, hey, take what you will from that. It's just weird. With the lining gone, this is just splitting the seam, right? And that, just pull your fabric apart a bit. You can see your stitches. Just hit them one at a time. But this vinyl is so thin that even the slightest nick in the fabric, and I'm using fabric in air quotes for this stuff, by the way, will cause a problem. All I do is pull and run the blade along the thread. That's it. Nothing quite like black fabric, huh? Shiny at that. Two things cameras don't normally do well with. I don't know if you can see this, but this seam doesn't match up, right? Which means the sleeve was put on the same way I normally put on my sleeves, and then this stitch was run the whole length, which is super useful for us. So that's one panel almost completely done. And since we're here, so normally you can get glue or something to stitch your edges here together. They didn't do anything, which is another reason why this thing is coming apart so easy. I'm just going to keep doing this the whole way, and we'll pick up as soon as I've got most of the pieces apart. So I'm about to pull the hood, right? And I started pulling this seam apart. But if you look, it dies in here and it gets buried around. So I need to go from the lapel back first. Order of operation is huge when it comes to taking stuff like this apart. I want to make one thing perfectly clear. I am bashing how this thing is put together, right? But I'm not. Because it is put together exactly at the price point I paid for it. That's a huge statement, and that's super important. The person who put this together, I can almost guarantee you, is a master of their craft. Looking at everything I see here, Stitches are straight, even. Everything looks like a trained professional put it together as cheaply as possible. And to know exactly what stitches you need to take out to make a thing work and still have it look like it does, I can imagine the next garment he did, or next garment they did, it's probably high fashion. And it was worth way more time and effort and money than I paid for this. When it comes to costumes, you get what you pay for. Whether it's your time or money or attention, you get what you pay for. Good costumes aren't cheap. Everything's been separated. And I find this fascinating, right? So only half of this has been chalked. Check out the sleeve. Right? Looks like they were trying to go through different iterations to figure out which one they actually wanted to use. I find this super fascinating because this is patterns. Like these are all measurements. They don't have a flat piece of pattern like I do. It's just measurements. The line for where the back piece went. It's neat. Next step is to lay out the leather, set everything out, and see how much we have. Hopefully I have enough. We'll find out. So I pulled up and printed a bunch of, I pulled up the character model and printed a bunch of reference, right? This isn't bad, but it's wrong. I opened the bitmap in Photoshop, the texture map for his costume, and outlined it. Look here. This part here, that's the sleeve, the red part, and that's the sleeve. Here's the hood. The hood's actually 3 pieces. And the back's got a split in the middle. And no extra seam. Well, 1 extra seam. Lots of choices too. Do I do it in red leather? Because everything just looked a little wet, you know what I mean? Or do I do fabric? Because I've got a bunch of fabric. Because I have this stuff. This is the same red we use for the Battlestar Galactica, but in red. And that looks really good, but I don't know if it looks right. This, oh, there may actually be enough of it, is Royal Garter Velvet. Which would look just spectacular, but I think it's wrong. And then there's just like the Esmeralda and Harlock stuff. Not quite sure. We'll figure something out. I'm going to lay a couple of options out, get Kim out here, see what she thinks, and we'll go from there. I played the game, right? And I really like the game. I thought it was pretty good. I haven't paid too much attention to the jacket. Now that I am, I'm like, oh, there's a lot that needs to be modified. Most of it's going to be quick and easy stuff anyway. It's way more complicated than I want it to be, by the way. Because it's not just a black jacket with a red leather lining, or red lining in general. It's a black and gray jacket with red leather, which does complicate things considerably. So I'm going to do a bunch of cutting on this thing. I was hoping not to, but I can't think of any way around it. So let me show you what the problem is. So here's a close-up of his front, right? And you see this light gray right there? That's a light gray leather. Well, it's not a light gray, it's a dark gray. But it goes all the way up. And then the red, because most jackets have a interfacing on the inside that's the same as the shell. So like a leather jacket would have a panel that goes down that's that color. But since his lapel turns out and is red, it means that piece is red. Which means I'm going to have to cut a gray and a red piece that are the same size. Yeah, they're just the same size. Alright, it's not the end of the world. But I didn't want to cut up this pattern just yet. Because the problem with cutting patterns is you have to add in seam allowance. And that is easy to forget. I planned on using the leather or the vinyl here as my template. Because apparently drawing on the leather, oh my goodness. So vinyl is designed to not let things stick to it. That's its main thing. Here I am trying to make a thing stick to vinyl instead of just flipping it over and marking the backside. So the only problem we're going to run into doing this is I can't do this on the back. Well, maybe I can. Yeah, we'll figure it out. There's a bunch of separate pieces on the back, and it's going to be difficult to add seam allowance to everything. Luckily, none of this is too thick and can all be cut with a pair of scissors. Makes my life so much easier. Whenever possible, mark on your patterns. Write everything down. I've never once gone, man, I wish I hadn't written down all this extra information. Nice thing about vinyl is it doesn't have a grain, neither does leather. So if you can get it to actually start cutting, you can just slide it along. Since I'm adding a lapel, I'm going to tape a piece of paper on and just, continue tracing so it's a square. So I love sewing, but does not translate to YouTube very well. Because I am 99.9 that this video, no traction. Not surprised. They're hard to film. End stop. They're very hard to film. I'm gonna move you up and down so you can see what I'm doing a little better. So this is the back panel. Now I have to get 3 panels. I guess I only need 2, huh? So I need the back with seam allowance and the princess seam with seam allowance. So it's not terrible. Okay, good. I don't know why I was adding an extra panel in there somewhere. So there's the center line here. I'm just going to add, since my seam allowance is 1/2 inch, I'm just going to add 1/2 inch over. So the seam is on this side. I'm adding the 1/2 inch this way. So there's a princess seam here. Now for princess seam just means it comes up and curves and dies in the sleeve. I don't know why it's a princess seam. That's just what they're called. To get both of them right, I need to do the same thing. Again, this is now my panel piece. Since the seam is on this side, I'm going to do the seam on the other side on this one. So I'm just going to measure. I want to be 90 degrees from my seam when I mark these. What I mean by that, let me zoom you in real quick so you can see what I'm talking about. All right. So now we have a seam that runs right here, right? And 1/2 inch, if my tape measure is off, isn't truly 1/2 inch. So I use, the straight line for the inch. I put that directly on the seam so it lines up. That puts me at a 90 degree mark from this seam. And then just periodically put down a mark, lining up with that 1 inch mark. And for a curve, it looks kind of like this. So I'm going to split the difference, put a little mark, put a little mark, and put a little mark. And then it's just a process of connecting the dots. Right there, I'm going to trace this exact curve, but 1/2 inch over. So princess seams are annoying and weird, but they look neat. So, it is what it is. And they're in just an absolute ton of garments. And before I go cutting everything out, there's a split. There it is. So if you look, there's a split in the, right here. There's a split down the middle. To do a split, you have to add more material in certain areas. So from where the split is, I'm probably going to go over another 1/2 inch so they can overlap. And we're going to do that with the other side. We're going to do the exact same thing I just did with the other side. This is ready to be cut out because the princess seam side is fine. I have fabric under here. I need to be very careful not to accidentally cut through it. The easiest way to do that is to not have fabric under what you're cutting. So it might have been a little hard to follow, so let me see if I can explain it. Right now, this actual stitch line is where things are going to get stitched. And this is where the split is. So instead of stitching all the way down, because then it flares weird, if you go over half an inch, and I know it looks like it's more than half an inch, but it's not, because this is the original line. We're going to shoot over with the stitch and then go down along what was the original cut line so that the two pieces on the back can overlap. It's not even that much. I decided to go down 36 inches. I should probably pop it up a little more, but I think that split's fine. It'll make sense once we put everything together. So now this hood does weird stuff, right? It kind of, it's like a lapel almost. So since we added this piece of paper here in to do this part, we need to take out that piece to make it, and then this is going to be one solid piece. I've also taken 2 inches off all the way around and curved it a little more because it had kind of a point. I didn't like that because we're going to add a middle piece in like that to flesh out the hood. But this should be the last alteration to, at the very least, the black part. So I flipped it over so the non-smooth side is sticking up because it's easier to mark on. Grab all my pieces and start to tracing. And I have to keep in mind, like this back piece has to be flipped. Every piece needs to be flipped, except for the hood because there's only one. Well, that part of the hood. So I'm going through all the pieces in my head. There's not many actually. There's the back side, the front third, and then the hood. And that's it. Not too terribly many pieces. Should be pretty easy to mark and cut out. And that's where we're at now. Just gonna mark everything out, trace it, flip things over, trace, pick back up in a minute. I may move you up and time lapse it. That'd be neat. I haven't done time lapse in a couple of days. Let's do that. Nice thing about cutting the red out last is I can lay everything out and see where we're at. This is where we're at. I'm gonna trace it, cut it out, pick it back up in a minute. Leather's all cut out. Gray is done. Red is done. Black is done. The only thing left to cut out is the lining. The lining's going to be super easy because I'm just going to take the pieces from the black that aren't red leather and trace them. There should just be a couple panels in the back and then one panel on the side. And the sleeves. And the sleeves, of course. But it should only take me a couple of minutes. I'll be right back. I modified the sleeve. I wanted to add a little more around the wrist. And since this is getting sewn to this, it doesn't really matter. But that just means I have to trace the lining out with both of them connected. Luckily this red, kind of silky, makes a great lining, and it's easy to mark on. The leather's a little difficult to mark with, just because, you know, leather. I'm not putting shoulder pads in, by the way. I don't think it needs it. And if I'm wrong, I'll add them in later. It's not terrible or difficult to do. I've also separated everything into piles of, like all the hood is together, all the front is together, all the back is together, and all the sleeves are together. Because it's kind of how I want to work with it now. So I'm going to continue to mark. By the way, this new workstation I have set up, it is fantastic. I mean, the amount of... I would normally have to do this on the floor, but having it up at work height level, oh, it is fantastic, and I am super, super glad I took the time to put it together. But I'm going to continue marking everything out, cut it out, and this is it. After this, we move on to sewing. So that's it. Everything's been cut out. I have the hood. I have the hood. I have the front, the back, and the sleeves. All I have left is to sew it. I'm going to sew next time. So not a lot seemed to happen in this video, but a ton happened. We adjusted the pattern, which is huge. Completely not necessarily the easiest thing in the world. Made it way more screen accurate. Cut all the pieces out. I mean, it's sewing. Sewing doesn't happen overnight. Sewing is a slow process. Unfortunately, this is going to take 2 videos to do. This is a journey. Steps. Even the small steps should be noticed and appreciated. And this is a small step, but it's huge for the costume because this is the last piece. I can be done with Dante, and Dante can go in a bin, except the jacket gets hung up, and then tomorrow, or then he's just done. It's another one off the list. And I get to move on to other things free and clear, and I don't have this floating in the back of my head. And ultimately, it's kind of what I'm working on. It's just trying to get all the list of everything I have going on in the back here checked off. Once they're all checked off, the list refreshes itself. So, you know, there's always something to do, always something to see. If you want to see where we go, there's only one way to do that. And share. A share would be nice too. So much happens when you share a video. I mean, you don't even have to actually share it. You can just click the copy link button, and that makes the algorithm think you shared it. But sharing it's even better because, you know, you might not be into sewing or Dante, but you might know someone who is. And the only way to know that is to share the video. Hope to see you next time.